What's up, guys? Welcome to Badasses of History. This is episode 6. Now, I just wrote this a couple hours ago, actually, and I had 2 others that I was potentially going to record and upload, but this story is so freaking awesome that I just had to do it now because I'm excited. It's a little different. It's not just a typical, well, you'll see. Enjoy. On September 12th, 1897, 21 badasses were born in fire. You see, this is not a story of a single man, but a single unit of 21 Sikh warriors who collectively held off a force of over 10,000 Afghan soldiers at the Battle of Saragarhi. So here's the situation. The small village of Saragarhi is directly placed in the middle of a supply route that would cut off resources to the Afghan rebels. If the village fell, the rebels would be able to advance much further with their campaign. This tiny outpost was within eyeshot of another more heavily fortified outpost called Fort Lockhart. Messages were sent back and forth through a series of mirrors using a form of Morse code back to Colonel Houghton, who recorded the events of this story. The colonel was also able to see a small amount of the action from his position, so this is their story. On the morning of September 12th, the Afghan rebels finally appeared. They are 10 to 12,000 in number, judging by the 7 banners that were marching with them. A message is sent back to Fort Lockhart to inform them that they are under attack and need reinforcements. Colonel Houghton realized that in order to get to Saragarhi, he would need to break through 10,000 troops to reach the Sikhs. Realizing this was impossible, he ordered the brave 21 to hold their ground until he could figure something out. Captain Havildar gathered his men and boldly laid out the situation. He offered retreat or a fight to the death. They all looked around at each other, paused for a brief moment, and unanimously agreed to fight to the last man. The captain sent back a single word to Colonel Houghton. Understood. Javi and his men took their positions along the walls made of mud and stone and prepared for battle. The Afghans at this point had completely surrounded the tiny fort, so each man had the responsibility of holding off the mass of rebels in front of them. That meant that each of the 20 Sikhs had to hold off 500 enemy soldiers. The last soldier was responsible for sending back messages to Fort Lockhart to explain the details of the battle. When the fighting finally began, the rebels rushed the fort with their entire force. Due to the rock walls, fortified gate, and high ground, the enemy casualties started adding up quickly. On multiple occasions, the Afghans attempted to breach the gate, but were unsuccessful, and the dead continued piling up around them. Unable to scale the defenses, the enemy decided to set fire to the foliage around the fort in order to create a smoke screen that would allow them to get close enough to begin digging under the walls. During this, the Afghan forces realized the impending difficulty of taking over this village and sent numerous peace offerings to our fearless 21. They explained that if they surrendered, they would be spared and given safe passage through the army. Each offer was responded in kind with a formal version of the middle finger. The Sikhs were famous for their determination, grit, and unwillingness to yield. Any man before or since who has ever encountered a Sikh warrior has had nothing but admiration for this branch of fighters, and this siege would be no different. The enemy was frustrated, but no doubt impressed by these men. Under certain death, with no possibility of victory, these brave soldiers refused to back down. They were fully prepared for their fate and embraced it happily. After a few hours, the rebels made their way through the walls. Captain Javi ordered 17 of his men to retreat to the inner defenses and sacrificed himself, along with 2 others, to engage the enemy in hand-to-hand combat. It's unclear exactly how long the 3 men held off the invaders, but the message sent to Fort Lockhart recorded it as vicious and grueling, leading me to believe that these 3 held their own for quite a while. Once the Afghans managed to get through the captain, they made their way to the inner defenses where they were faced with 17 more Sikhs with very little ammunition. Once that was expended, they unsheathed their swords and rushed the attackers. This also must have been a rather long engagement because during the fighting, the messenger had enough time to ask through Morse code if he was permitted to pack up his mirror and join the fight. The colonel granted him permission, and the majority of the men at Fort Lockhart watched as the last Sikh soldier fired his rifle into the swarm of rebels. They witnessed the lone warrior dispatch at least 20 Afghans single-handedly. The invaders were unable to reach him as he was stationed high up in the watchtower, so they resorted to burning the structure down. Moments later, he was heard by thousands screaming the Sikh battle cry as he was burned alive. One will be blessed eternally who says God is the ultimate truth. The battle was over. In all, 21 fearless Sikhs had defended the tiny outpost to the estimated cost of nearly 600 Afghan soldiers. A few days later, the efforts of these brave men would be fully understood. The plan was, take out Saragarhi and turn all attention to Fort Lockhart and control the region. However, with the delay caused by the Sikhs, Colonel Houghton was able to obtain reinforcements and drive off the invasion. Shortly after, more than 30,000 British soldiers arrived to pursue the rebels across the country, ultimately ending the struggle of power with a peace agreement. Captain Harvey and his men quickly gained worldwide recognition for their heroics, and when Queen Victoria heard of their exploits, she stood with the entire British nation and gave a standing ovation. Every member of the 21 received the Indian Order of Merit, which is like our Medal of Honor. They were honored with dozens of statues, monuments, and schools with their namesake. The Sikh regiments still celebrate September 12th as the commemorative holiday in honor of the brave men who refused to back down. The battle is considered around the world as the Indian version of the 300 Spartans and one of the greatest last stands in all of history. Alright guys, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed. Like I said, this was going to be a little different. It wasn't just a single badass, but an entire unit that was badass. And yes, I'm fully aware that I probably butchered the pronunciation of many of these words and names, but I am American, so I'm not as well educated on Indian pronunciations. As always, like, subscribe, and tell your friends. Thanks.